So, you think the fighting ended when the revolution was won? Think again. The battle for America's soul was just getting started, and this wasn't a fight with guns and cannons. It was a war of ideas waged between two absolute titans of the founding generation, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Let's dive into how this epic rivalry shaped, well, everything.
I mean, seriously, what was this new country going to be? Everything was up for grabs. Was it going to be a powerful, centralized nation, a real player on the world stage? Or was it going to be something totally different, a quiet, decentralized collection of states, all about farming and individual freedom? That one question right there kicked off the first and maybe the most important political fight in American history.
And when I say competing visions, I mean they were polar opposites. We're talking night and day here. On one side, you've got Hamilton. He pictured an America with a powerhouse federal government, an economy humming with trade and factories, and tight with the financial giant of the day, Great Britain. On the other side, Thomas Jefferson. He dreamed of a nation of independent farmers, an agrarian republic where power belonged to the states and their friends were the revolutionaries over in France. These weren't just little policy squabbles, you guys. These were two completely different blueprints for America.
All right, so where does this fight really kick off? The economy, of course. As George Washington's first Treasury Secretary, Hamilton had this, frankly, radical plan to get the brand new and very broke nation on its feet. He looked at the country's massive debt not as a problem, but as an opportunity, a tool to build a nation. His plan was basically a three-step knockout punch to the country's financial chaos. First, he wanted the new federal government to take on all the war debt from the individual states. A super controversial move, right? Because it immediately gave the central government a ton of power. Second, create a national bank, a lot like the Bank of England, to manage the nation's money and get business booming. And third, how do you pay for all this? New tariffs and a very provocative new tax on stuff like whiskey.
Now here's the genius part of Hamilton's plan, or the really sneaky part, depending on who you ask. By having the federal government take on all that debt and issue new bonds, he basically made America's richest people bet on the U.S. government. If the country succeeded, they'd get rich. If it failed, well, so did their bank accounts. It was a brilliant way to tie the fate of the nation to the wallets of its most powerful citizens. And if you want proof that this new federal government had teeth, look no further than the Whiskey Rebellion. When farmers out in Pennsylvania rose up against that new whiskey tax, the government didn't just send a strongly worded letter. No, President Washington himself, in uniform, led an army of 13,000 soldiers to shut it down. The rebellion pretty much melted away. The message couldn't have been clearer. The federal government is in charge now, and it's not messing around.
You know, a disagreement this deep, this fundamental, couldn't just stay a friendly debate between two guys in a room. Nope, it was way too big for that. It boiled over and created something the founders actually dreaded: political parties. The nation was officially dividing into two camps. So you basically had two teams form. On one side, you've got Hamilton and John Adams with their Federalists. They were strong in the northern cities, the merchants, the bankers, the people who wanted a strong national government to protect their business interests. And on the other side, Jefferson and James Madison's Democratic Republicans. Their base was the Southern planters and the farmers out west, folks who were deeply suspicious of a powerful government run by Northern money. The battle lines were drawn.
And look, you don't have to take my word for it. Jefferson himself laid it all out pretty clearly back in 1798. He said you've got one side, the Federalists, who think the president needs more power to get things done, and then you've got the other side, his side, who thinks the president is already way too strong and looking a little too much like the king they just fought a war to get rid of. And this whole thing really hit a boiling point under the next president, John Adams. The Federalists in charge passed these laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts. They basically made it a crime to criticize the government and were aimed right at their pro-French opponents. For Jefferson's Republicans, this was like a five-alarm fire. This wasn't just policy anymore. This was tyranny. It was proof that the Federalists were trying to stamp out the very freedoms the Revolution had been about. So that Federalist power play, it completely backfired. And it set the stage for what Jefferson called the Revolution of 1800. When he won the presidency, it was a huge deal. The first time in modern history that power was peacefully handed from one rival party to another. It was a massive shift away from Hamilton's world and toward Jefferson's. So Jefferson gets into office, and what's the first thing he does? He starts rolling up his sleeves and taking apart the system Hamilton built. He wanted a smaller government, a smaller national debt, and a smaller military. His whole philosophy was simple:
The government's job is to keep the peace and then just get out of the way so people can live their lives.
But then, something happened that nobody saw coming, an opportunity that would completely change the game. Over in France, Napoleon was fighting wars and needed cash. So, in 1803, he makes an unbelievable offer. Sell the entire Louisiana territory to America for just $15 million. I mean, can you imagine? With one signature, he could literally double the size of the United States.
And this deal, this was the ultimate win for Jefferson's entire vision. I mean, think about it. In one fell swoop, it kicked a major European power off America's doorstep. It gave them full control of the Mississippi River, a superhighway for trade. And most importantly, it opened up a practically endless frontier for the small, independent farmers that he saw as the heart and soul of America. This was his empire of liberty, becoming a reality. Okay, so Jefferson's vision is expanding west, but that old ghost, the rivalry with Great Britain, it wasn't gone, not by a long shot. All that tension on the seas and out on the frontier was about to explode into what some people called a second war for independence. And this war? It would be the final nail in the coffin for Hamilton's party. One of the biggest triggers for the war was this British practice called impressment. And it's exactly as nasty as it sounds. The British Royal Navy would just stop American ships on the high seas, board them, and basically kidnap sailors, claiming they were deserters from the British Navy. For Americans, this was an absolute outrage, a total violation of their rights as a free country. Now, the war itself, it was a real mess. A tough, bloody slog. The first American attempts to invade Canada were total disaster. The British Navy blockaded the entire coast and even marched into Washington, D.C. and burned the White House. But the U.S. clawed back with some huge naval victories on the Great Lakes and managed to beat back major British invasions. In the end, the Treaty of Ghent in 1815 basically called it a draw. Nobody really won or lost any territory. But here's the thing. Even though the war was technically a tie, it had a huge political winner and loser back home. The Federalists, who were mostly in New England, had hated the war from the start. They thought it was a disaster, and some of them even talked about seceding from the Union. So when the war ended and this wave of American patriotism swept the country, the Federalists looked like a bunch of unpatriotic traitors. And just like that, poof, Hamilton's party, the party that built America's entire financial system, was gone. It just collapsed. So in the short term, Jefferson's party totally won the day. They were the only ones left standing. But the bigger battle, the battle of ideas, never really went away. Think about America today. We have a powerful central government, a global commercial empire, a massive military. That all sounds a lot more like Hamilton's vision, right? And yet, we still cherish those Jeffersonian ideals of individual liberty and a deep suspicion of government power. That tension, that tug-of-war between these two founding visions is still at the heart of the American experiment. So I'll leave you with this. Which vision do you think is winning now?